The land around the ranch was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made every sound louder. The wind brushing over the grass, the creak of old fences, the low hum of insects waking with the sun. For old rancher Tom Weller, it was just another day of work. He had lived on that piece of land for almost 30 years, far from the city noise and crowds. The only company he had was his loyal dog Buck, a big shepherd with golden fur and smart, alert eyes. Tom and Buck understood each other without words. Buck followed him everywhere, to the barn, across the pastures, and down the long dirt roads that wound through the open plains. They shared the same rhythm of life, sunrise, chores, meals, and sleep. But that morning something felt different. The air was damp from 3 days of steady rain, and a mist still clung to the hills. The sky was gray and heavy, and Tom felt uneasy for reasons he couldn't explain. He pulled on his worn-out boots, grabbed his hat, and called to Buck. "Come on, boy. Let's check the western fence." Buck barked softly and trotted beside him as they made their way through the muddy path. The ranch stretched wide and lonely, the kind of place where news traveled slow and strangers rarely came. Tom liked it that way, peaceful, predictable, and quiet. But as they reached the far end of the property, Buck suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, his nose twitching. He gave a low growl, something Tom hadn't heard in a long time. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, squinting ahead. Buck didn't answer, of course. He just started running, fast and sure, toward the edge of the field where an old wooden fence marked the border of the land. Beyond that fence was a patch of wild grass and an old, forgotten burial ground, a small place where people from the nearby town used to bury their dead many years ago. It had been unused for decades, except for the wind and weeds that grew over the old stones. Tom felt a chill crawl down his spine as he followed. Buck reached the burial ground first and began pawing at the dirt near a mound that looked freshly turned. The soil was darker, wetter, and clearly newer than the rest. Tom frowned. He walked closer and saw a wooden cross at the head of the grave. It looked freshly made, the wood still smooth and light in color. On it, a name was burned in uneven letters, Martha Clay, 1984, 2025. Tom stared at it confused. He didn't know anyone named Martha Clay. He hadn't heard about any recent burial in town either. The sheriff usually let folks know if something like that happened, especially if it was done on private land. Who did this? He muttered to himself. He looked around, but there were no footprints, no tools, no vehicle tracks. Just that fresh mound of dirt and Buck whining softly, his paws still scraping at the soil. "Come on, Buck," Tom said, his voice a little shaky. "Let's leave it be." But Buck didn't move. He whined again, louder this time, and began digging faster. Dirt flew behind him, his paws working hard. Then he stopped and let out a strange bark, sharp and short, like a warning. Tom knelt down beside him. He pressed his hand against the loose soil and felt something strange, a soft vibration under the ground, like something was moving. He froze. He held his breath and leaned closer. For a long second, there was only silence. Then, from deep beneath the earth came a faint knock. Tom's heart jumped. He thought it must be his imagination, maybe the echo of his pulse. But then it came again, clearer this time. A slow, weak tap-tap followed by a sound that didn't belong in a graveyard. A voice, a broken, shaking voice muffled by earth and wood. "Help. Please, help." Tom stumbled back, his chest tight. No, that can't be," he whispered. His eyes darted to Buck, who was barking wildly now, circling the grave and whining like he understood exactly what was happening. "Someone's down there," Tom shouted, panic rising in his throat. His old knees hit the mud as he began clawing at the dirt with his hands. The rain had softened it, making it easier to dig, but every handful felt heavier than the last. He tore at the ground, nails breaking, fingers bleeding, heart racing. Buck dug beside him, panting hard, refusing to stop. After what felt like forever, Tom's fingers hit wood, the lid of a coffin. He wiped the mud off with trembling hands. His breath came in gasps. Then he pressed his ear against the surface. He heard it again. The voice, weak, desperate, barely more than a whisper. "Help. They buried me wrong." Tom's whole body went cold. He staggered to his feet and ran back toward his truck, slipping on the wet ground. His hands shook as he grabbed his shovel and rushed back to the grave. "Hold on," he shouted. "I'm here. Just hold on." The digging seemed endless. The rain started again, light at first, then heavier. The wind picked up, but Tom didn't stop. Mud covered his clothes and his arms ached, but he kept going. driven by something he couldn't explain, something between fear and hope. When the shovel hit the coffin lid again, he dropped it and used his hands to pull away the last of the dirt. Then with all his strength he pried open one corner of the wood. The smell of wet earth filled the air. And then he saw her. A pale face, lips blue, eyes fluttering open against the light. Her breathing was shallow, her hair matted with dirt. But she was alive. Barely, but alive. Tom couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Good Lord," he whispered. "You're alive." The woman blinked, her eyes glassy. She tried to speak, her voice no louder than a breath. "They buried me wrong," she said, the words shaking. Tom took off his coat and wrapped it around her, trying to keep her warm. "You're safe now," he said softly, though his voice trembled. "You're gonna be okay." He reached for his old radio and pressed the button. "Sheriff? Sheriff, it's Tom Weller," he said, his voice shaking. "I need an ambulance out here fast. There's a woman, she's alive." "You hear me? She's alive. Someone buried her on my land." The radio crackled with static before the sheriff's confused voice answered. "What are you talking about, Tom? Alive? That can't be. I'm telling you, she's breathing," Tom shouted. "Get out here now." Buck stayed close to the woman, licking her hand softly as if to comfort her. Her eyes opened a little more and she looked at the dog, then at Tom. She whispered again, "Please, don't let them take me back." Tom didn't understand what she meant, but he could see the fear in her eyes. He held her hand, trying to steady her trembling fingers. "No one's taking you anywhere," he said. "You just hold on." In the distance, the faint wail of sirens began to echo through the hills. It was a sound Tom had never been so grateful to hear. He stayed beside her until the rescue team arrived, his coat soaked, his hands muddy, but he never once looked away. When the paramedics lifted her out, her lips moved again. The same haunting words came out weak and slow. "They buried me wrong." "They buried me wrong?" The sheriff stood there pale and speechless, staring at the open grave. The paramedics exchanged confused looks but kept working, wrapping her in blankets, checking her pulse, whispering to each other in disbelief. Tom watched as the ambulance drove off, its lights fading into the gray distance. The rain had stopped. The air felt heavy again, but quieter than before, like the land itself was holding its breath. He looked down at the broken grave, the empty space that had almost become a woman's prison forever. Then he looked at Buck, who sat quietly beside him, still watching the road. "Good boy," Tom said softly. "You found her." Buck wagged his tail once, just once, and pressed his head against Tom's knee. The rancher stood there for a long time, the muddy wind blowing gently through the grass, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Somewhere out there, a woman who had been buried alive was breathing again, and no one yet knew how or why. The ambulance disappeared down the long dirt road, leaving Tom standing beside the open grave. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung heavy and low over the land. Buck sat quietly near the mound of dirt, his fur wet and muddy, eyes fixed on his owner. Tom looked down at the ground that had nearly claimed a life and shook his head slowly. He had lived on that ranch for decades, but never had anything like this happen before. For the rest of that day, he couldn't focus on anything else. He tried to feed the horses, tried to repair the broken fence, but his mind kept returning to that pale face rising out of the grave, to the faint voice that whispered, "They buried me wrong." The sound of it stayed in his head like an echo that refused to fade. That evening, the sheriff finally came by to speak with him. Sheriff Dale Hargrove was a tall, quiet man who had known Tom for years. His truck pulled up near the barn just as the sun was setting behind the hills. He stepped out, his face serious, and walked toward Tom. "Tom," the sheriff began, "I don't even know where to start with this one." Tom nodded. "She's alive, Sheriff." "You saw her." "I did," the sheriff said, rubbing the back of his neck. "And the hospital says she's stable. Weak, but she's breathing on her own now. They said she keeps repeating your name and the dog's." Tom glanced down at Buck, who wagged his tail once. "She was scared," Tom said. "She thought someone would take her back." "I don't know what that means," the sheriff sighed. "Her name is Martha Clay. According to her ID, she lived about 20 miles east near the old Willow Creek area. The hospital ran her fingerprints. She was listed as deceased just 3 days ago. Official death certificate, doctor's signature. Everything looked legal." Tom frowned. "So how does a woman end up with a death certificate while she's still alive?" That's what we're trying to find out, the sheriff said. We talked to the folks who handled her so-called burial. They swear she was gone. No pulse, no response, body temperature cold. It doesn't make sense, Tom didn't reply. He just stared out at the horizon, where the last bit of light was fading. Maybe she wasn't gone, he said quietly. Maybe she was just trapped in something her body couldn't escape. The sheriff looked at him. Whatever it was, she's asking to see you. You saved her, Tom. She remembers your voice. The next morning, Tom drove into town. The hospital was small, with white walls and a smell of disinfectant that filled the halls. When he walked into Martha's room, he found her sitting up in bed, wrapped in a blanket. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were clearer now, sharp, curious, and calm. She smiled faintly when she saw him. You're the rancher, she said softly. The one with the dog, Tom nodded. That's me. His name's Buck. He's the one who found you. I remember his barking, she said. I thought I was dreaming. Tom sat down in the chair beside her. You said something when I found you, he said gently. You said they buried you wrong. Do you remember what happened? Martha looked down at her hands for a long moment before answering. I don't remember everything, she said slowly. I remember feeling very sick. I lived alone out near the woods. I had been sick for days and couldn't move, couldn't eat. Then one morning I just drifted off. Everything went dark and I couldn't move, couldn't speak. But I could still hear. People came into my house. They said I was gone. Her voice trembled slightly, but she went on. I wanted to scream. I tried to tell them I was alive, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. It was like being trapped inside myself. I heard them call the doctor, and then I felt cold hands touch me. They said there was no heartbeat. Then everything faded again. Tom sat quietly, his eyes fixed on her. Every word she spoke made his heart ache. When I woke up again, Martha continued, I was in the dark. I couldn't breathe at first. It was tight and heavy, like something pressing on my chest. I realized I was somewhere closed in. I started to panic. I tried to move, but there wasn't much room. Then I remembered. I'd been sick. They thought I was dead. They put me in a box, her hands trembled. I scratched the wood until my fingers hurt. I tried to shout, but no one could hear me. The air was running out, then I heard rain. I felt the ground move a little, maybe from water. And then, a dog barking. I don't remember much after that. Only your voice, Tom swallowed hard. He couldn't imagine the fear she must have felt. You're safe now, he said quietly. You're not alone anymore. She gave a small smile, her eyes filling with tears. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you and Buck. I prayed someone would hear me. And you did. Over the next few days, the story spread across the small town like wildfire. Reporters came from nearby cities, curious about the woman who came back from the grave. The sheriff tried to keep things calm, explaining that it was likely a rare medical condition, something that made her heartbeat and breathing so faint they couldn't be detected. But most people just called it a miracle. Tom didn't like the attention. He avoided the cameras and stayed on his ranch, fixing fences and feeding his horses, trying to return to his normal routine. But things weren't the same anymore. Every time he looked at the spot where the grave had been, he felt something deeper. A reminder of how close one person had come to disappearing forever. A week later, a car pulled up near his house. When Tom stepped outside, he saw Martha standing there. She looked stronger now, her color returning, her smile gentle but certain. Buck barked and ran to her, tail wagging. She knelt to pet him, laughing softly. I had to come see you, she said. The doctors say I'm going to be fine. I just wanted to thank you properly. Tom shook his head. You don't need to thank me. You being alive is thanks enough. I owe you more than that, she said. You didn't just find me. You listened when no one else would have. They stood in silence for a while, the wind moving softly through the grass. Do you ever wonder why things happen the way they do? She asked. Tom nodded slowly. Every day. But sometimes I think we're meant to be where we are just at the right moment. She smiled. Maybe that's true. Maybe Buck was meant to find me. Tom chuckled. He's got better instincts than most people. They shared a quiet laugh, and for the first time since that strange day, the ranch didn't feel heavy anymore. The air felt clean and alive. Months later, when the wildflowers bloomed again across the fields, a small wooden marker stood near the old burial ground. It wasn't a grave this time, just a sign with carved words that read, Life found here. April 2025. It was Martha's idea. She said she wanted it to remind people to never give up hope, no matter how dark things seemed. She and Tom became good friends, visiting each other often. Sometimes she'd bring food and talk with him on the porch while Buck slept at their feet. The townspeople still talked about what had happened. Some said it was a miracle, some said it was science. But for Tom, it didn't matter what others called it. He knew what he had heard, the faint knock under the earth, the voice that refused to die, the courage of a woman who somehow found her way back. On quiet evenings, when the sky turned orange and the wind swept through the hills, Tom would look out at that wooden marker and smile. Life had a way of surprising people, he thought. Sometimes it hid hope in the darkest places, and sometimes it sent a loyal dog to dig it back out.